Good evening. Well, we try to connect one of our councillors. I'd like to open the regular committee of the whole meeting for Monday, January 20th, 2025 and call it to order at 6 p.m. I'm Councillor Garnett. I'll be chairing tonight's meeting, and joining me in the chambers are my colleagues. To my far left, Councillor Novak, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Rintoul. To my far right, in this particular case, Councillor Duncan and Mayor McNeil-Smith, and joining us online, hopefully, if you can hear us, perfect, is Councillor Duck. I'd like to thank staff for in attendance tonight. I don't see any online, so they're all here in chambers. Thank you very much. Also a welcome to those of us who are joining by live stream, and those who will be viewing this meeting later on when it's posted to the website at a later date. And a special thank you to the people in the audience and the public. Thank you for joining us this evening. I know you have plenty of options of things to do, and to spend time with us on a Monday night is a treat to see the chamber so full. So thank you very much for being here. And with that, I'll move to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding this meeting on the territory of the Wasanich Nations. And we thank them and have gratitude for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia. And want to be mindful of the fact that the decisions we make at this table impact our local First Nations neighbors. And with that, I'll move on to approval of the agenda. And there are 13 late items of correspondence, and they all pertain to item 8A. And I'll just briefly mention the names of the letter writers. Ms. Ewing, Ms. Cox, Ms. Diller, Ms. Haugen, Mr. McAllister, Mr. Rippon. There's quite a few here. Mr. Hanna, Mr. Welburn, Mr. Staples, Ms. Pullinger, Ms. Alvarez, here, Ms. Steele, and Mr. Payne. Those have all been added to the agenda. And so with those added, I'll look for a member to move the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Novak, seconded by Mayor McNeil-Smith. Are there any additions, omissions, or errors? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Next up, we have public participation period, and traditionally what happens in committee of the whole is the public is allowed to speak to items that are actually on the agenda that evening. So we have two items on the agenda, and item 7A has its own public participation period. So we'll bypass that, and we'll ask if you want to speak to that item, if you could just hold back until we get to that point in time. So basically what we are is at item 8A, and that's the Bowerbank Bikeway discussion. So what we'll do in this particular instance is when you come to the microphone, there's a button on the bottom of the stand. If you push that, it makes the light go red at the top. That means the microphone is active. And we'll have you state your name and your municipality of residence. But prior to doing that, and we'll have about 4 minutes each if you could stick to that. Prior to do that, we do have one member of the public who is joining us electronically. So I'll go to that person first. So I'll go to Ms. Mariah O'Brien, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mariah O'Brien. I am a resident of Sydney who is currently dependent and grateful for handy-dart transportation. Previously, I was an active urban and recreational cyclist with a long history of support for environmental protection. If you have questions following my presentation, I will answer any I can. As I understand it from last week's meeting, tonight you may decide whether or not it is wise for Council to open a further period of community feedback regarding the Bowerbank Bikeway, which in 2023 was selected to become the new north-south cycling route through Sydney. Two days ago, on a beautiful sunny Saturday afternoon, I took my dog and my mobility walker and made a circuit through Sydney. From my home on Mills Road through the side streets to Calvin and Bowerbank. From there, we walked the Calvin Laneway to the Lochside Trail, which we followed to Beacon. The detour signs there directed us up 8th Street to side streets, where my assessment of the route's suitability ended. We returned to the town on beautiful Oceanside Walkway. My reason was to assess the route's suitability for both pedestrians and cyclists. The results were positive, and learning that its continuation from Beacon to the old trail is already under consideration. I did wonder why Sydney, which has limited space for transportation routes, is considering developing a second north-south cycling route through town. A route that is likely to have cars jigging and jagging through the neighborhood streets to get to from Bowerbank or Siddle to reach Rest Haven, and when they arrive there, the turn either north or south will be intermittent. Furthermore, all this disruption may not reduce traffic on Bowerbank Siddle route from the currently estimated number of vehicles, 1,500 per day, to the 1,000 limit permitted for BC's active transportation guide for bicyclists. Okay. Encourage you to listen to what residents of the neighborhood have to say in 2025. And I have 3 additional reasons. The draft ATP got a very large response from the community. You got 542-page report, pages 71 to 433, and letters from the community. I read and charted 302 of them. They were about multiple topics and many sites. In my opinion, amidst them, there was solid transportation planning advice coming from knowledgeable members of the community, but it got lost in the aggregation, which stressed only the most frequent remarks. Now, in 2025, the issue is focused on one specific site that needs consideration. Now also the highway bike path is in excellent condition. It has wide lanes in both directions. A single bike can pass a slower bike, or bikes can ride side by side with a friend. There's lots of space for pedestrians with a dog or persons with a mobility aid in each lane. The surface is smooth and there is good signage. There are wide access paths that lead from the path to the various residential communities you pass. My third reason, the 2022 consultants did not include an impact study. They also appear not to have considered neighborhood uses of the roads they were choosing for a bike lane. If they had, you would not have gotten 99 letters about the long-term care uses of Mills Road and the inappropriateness of the bike lanes there, which I know you deleted. Perhaps don't make future decisions for Sydney based on information in the 2022 ATP consultants report. If you open the doors for more community feedback on the Bowerbank Siddle issue, it is unlikely to be arguments for or against active transportation. It will be, is this bikeway plan likely to serve the needs of the local community as well as the traveling cyclists? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. If you could just disconnect from the meeting, that would be appreciated, and then you can rejoin the live stream. Thank you again. So I'll open the forum for the first time for anybody that wants to speak.
It works. Eric Payne, Melville Avenue, Sydney, Mr. Mayor, councillors, thank you. I live, as some of you know, halfway between the bike path and Bowerbank on Melville, 100 yards either way. So we've been sitting out and looking in both directions in the past since, well, last Monday when I last spoke. There's approximately 8 times as many cyclists using the bike path as Bowerbank in any given 2-hour period that we sampled. Safety and the lack of it, having watched Bowerbank as well, are not related to the configuration of Bowerbank Avenue. It has everything to do with drivers and cyclists ignoring the law of the land and traffic safety. Cyclists blow stop signs, motorists speed and blow stop signs. The road isn't the issue. It's the motorists and the cyclists. And I was a cyclist, and I'd like to think I stopped at all stop signs in 70,000 kilometers, but I didn't. There's a few that do. There's one in the room here. Jamie Welburn, he stops at all stop signs. Oh, good on you. But there is that issue, and the real risks are no amount of road realignment is going to stop bad drivers or bad cycling habits. Pardon me, see, this is very similar to the note I wrote, so I'm sort of cribbing from that. I'd like to hear from what the RCMP have to say. I know they are stressed in terms of manpower and budgets, but what they would have to say about traffic on Bowerbank and Siddle. I support walking, cycling, transit. I used all for years. But like many of the people in the neighborhood that's been affected, old age and injury have caught up to me. And automobile is the only way to go, sadly. I wish it were otherwise, but it's not. So please consider alternatives, enhancing safety and cycling access perhaps from Sydney Elementary up to the bike path. Because that to me is where, that's the gathering place for the cyclists in the morning and the afternoon. Up Henry Avenue to the bike path from the elementary school. It's, so thank you. I'm hungry. I'm going to go home and eat in a few minutes. And thanks for listening to me again. Good night.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, members of staff, general public. Eric Diller, resident of Sydney. And I spoke at the last meeting when this was when council was going to make the decision to move this to this meeting or not. And at that meeting, I spoke about safety, safety of streets and children and seniors who may walk, roll through our town. And tonight I want to talk about choices. And we have in Sydney a road network that is built for cars. And overlaid onto that network that's built for cars, we have a kind of crappy public transit network. BC Transit does as well as they can, but it's neither fast nor is it frequent, thereby being kind of crappy. And what council is going to be debating tonight is whether or not to take a tiny little portion of that road network that's built for cars and make it a little bit less crappy for people who are riding and rolling. And so when you make those choices and when we have the decisions that people will make in aggregate over whether they're going to drive or whether they're going to bike or roll, they do take safety into account, but they also take convenience. And so in order to make it a little bit less of a easy decision to take the car, I think it's important for us to help make those choices in favor of walking or cycling. Now, many members of this council will claim to be advocates for local businesses and for growing a strong local economy. And whenever we build a car-centric place like we have done here, whenever somebody is forced to drive a car because the options are either non-existent or dangerous, then that forces them to buy a car, to pay for insurance, to buy gas. And every time people make that decision, all of that money for the cars, the insurance, and the gas goes out of this region except for a tiny little percentage of it. And so if you are in favor of a strong local economy, we should be doing everything we can to help people walk or cycle or take public transit. This is about choices that you will make for the rest of the population of Sydney and I might add, a fair number of people in North Saanich. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call for a second time. Is anyone wishing to address council?
Good evening. You've seen me before for another matter. I live on White Birch Road.
Sorry, could you just give your name?
My
please?
name's Catherine Yonker,
Thank you.
but I'm an avid biker too. In fact, I have a bike repair injury right now. But I also belong to a couple of cycling groups, and I'm really heavily in favor of increased access for cyclists in this town. I don't think Bowerbank is the solution. I think the bike path that's already established along the highway to a certain point is quite sufficient, but we do have a problem on the other end. And I did participate in the active community planning a few years ago and gave feedback at that point. I answered the survey about the bike paths and where we should be putting bike lanes, because I do want to use my bike to come and get groceries. I want to have a place to lock it up safely, and I want it to be more convenient for me not to have to bring the car downtown. So I absolutely, in every way, support having increased bike safety routes in our town to be more convenient. But Bowerbank is not the answer. I frequently meet people at Marigold Cafe and cycle through Sydney with a large group of people. We have a challenge that's been created by all the building on Rust Haven, because I see many groups of cyclers going up that road every single day to go up through North Saanich. So we can't fix another pathway up that road because we've created an issue on that road by all that building and now people parking on the streets. But nonetheless, those cyclers go up there every day, and I appreciate how aggravating it can be for the multiple people who have cyclists 6 abreast going across the road, and I see them myself. However, I think we need to look at a bit more, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And if we're trying to make it more accessible, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree, I want it to be more accessible for me and safer, but I think we haven't considered this carefully. If you look as we come into town from Lochside, that bike path could be rerouted around 2nd Street, down 3rd, and then perhaps up Amelia to get on the bike path. And it would be much safer, and there's a lot less traffic, because coming up 5th Street from Lochside is not safe. And I've had multiple other groups coming through town cycling asking me to get off of 5th when I'm leading a ride to find an alternative, quieter street, which I often use 3rd. So I am in favor of having improved bike infrastructure here. We don't need it on Bowerbank, considering the location of the bike path. That doesn't make sense. It's one street over, essentially. But we do need better bike infrastructure. And it would be better if it was on a less busy street. Now, I realize Bowerbank is not a busy street. I've been walking around because I can't cycle right now. So I've gone up and down there a few times to see what you've proposed. But I think if we're trying to improve access and infrastructure for the people of Sydney and the cyclers that come out here all the time, we need to look at an alternative to what's being proposed. I don't think we're going to enhance things by using the proposed pathway that's been submitted or prepared. I think we need to look at alternatives that might actually put bikers in a safer space. Like I said, around the corner by the ferry terminal, up 2nd, down 3rd, and then up Amelia and onto the bike path might be a lot more convenient. I haven't obviously worked out the logistics. I'm not a planner, but I think the proposed setup is not actually going to enhance anything for bikers. You can come up to that corner, you can go around and onto the bike path quite easily, and then onto the side streets off of the bike lane that's already established. And I know that because I bike up and down it all the time. So I would ask that you reconsider, take another fresh look at where to put it, that it might be actually enhance safety and be a little less inconvenient for the multiple people that I understand justifiably have concerns about where it's being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Not yet. We're good.
Hi, my name is Brenda Honoloma. I live on Vallis Place, which is a cul-de-sac off of Bowerbank, just south of the Ardwell four-way stop. I've lived there almost 33 years. My kids went to preschool, Sydney Elementary, North Saanich, Parkland, with many of the council and mayor's kids. And we bike, we're a biking family. As I get older, I don't bike so much, but we have relied on biking, and I still bike to Thrifties to shop and stuff, and Red Barn, I'll bike or walk. So I'm a huge advocate for making streets safer for biking, but having lived there so long in the Bowerbank neighborhood, I can tell you right now, this is not the answer. It's going to cause so much chaos for working moms, young moms, moms dropping off their kids, coming home from work, and just the thoughts of the congestion that it's going to cause on every east-west street from Bowerbank to Rest Haven is mind-boggling. And just to say, I've sat on so many committees. I was on Vision Sydney committee in the early 2000s. I was on the Peninsula Dry Grad committee. I've been on the PAC every year. I founded the Healthy Schools committee, and I've never ever experienced jumping to a conclusion so quickly without informing people correctly, because I felt like last year I would have been here if there was more information on what was actually going to happen on Bowerbank. Our neighborhood thought there was going to be a bike lane inserted or painted or whatever. So I just, that it's not the answer. I think the amount of money wasted doing this could be towards the bike path that's already there, which we use all the time. And I just, you know, it's a waste of my tax money and many other people's tax money, and I'm just appalled that it has gone to this without proper, you know, I go to Mary Winspear to every single thing and read all the boards and look at all the signs. There was signs everywhere when the parks were gonna get changed, but I just felt like we were uninformed a while ago, and, you know, I've made my opinion pretty clear on Town of Sydney's Facebook page and on social pages, and I wrote a letter. I spent half an hour talking to Connor Banks on the phone, and he didn't disagree with many of the things that I said. So I hope that you put the money into the bike path and put some lights there and clear out some of make the people that live there and the communities that are along there clear out some of their bushes and garbage, because entering the bike path is sometimes a dangerous issue because you can't see what's coming or going. So just some thought put into that, I think, is the answer, and put this on the back burner for a while. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call for a third and final time if anybody else would like to address council.
I'll move to extend public participation. Second.
Call the question, all in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jamie Wellborn, and I live in the Sydney area just off of Bowerbank. I'm in favor of this, as I've said before, and I just wanted to add tonight that we had a group of cyclists, I counted 14. We rode along from North Saanich along the route of the project, and we ended up here tonight, and many of them are in the room with us. And there's families, there's elderly people, it's all ages and abilities, and we want somewhere safer to ride. And of course the bike path is great, and I'm not someone who would avoid it for any reason. I use it myself all the time. But you need to be able to get to the bike path, and to get there, you need to have safe routes. And Bowerbank is one of the routes that a lot of people have to take. So we can't just build one island of safety along the highway, which mostly is used by people traveling through Sydney, going on to somewhere else like the ferries or the Victoria. You need to be able to actually get from your home to a destination. And something like second into third is not a bad idea, but I think if you were to try and do that instead of this, you would be seeing a lot of the same negativity, the same feedback. And I don't think it really matters where you try to build, it's going to be the same feedback. So I think if you just try and build anywhere, people will over time see that it actually wasn't as big of a deal as they thought. As you see in downtown Victoria and elsewhere, over time the complaints start to slow down and eventually people adapt and it just becomes a new normal. And I think we just need safe places to cycle for all ages and abilities, and not to focus on the convenience of drivers who may have to go an extra 1 minute on their commute. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Oliver, and I think that the Bikeway should be there because I used to go to Sydney Elementary, and there's a lot of traffic there in the morning, so I think it would help to put the Bikeway there, for there to be less traffic.
For the record, that was Oliver Dave from North Saanich. My name is Graham Day, also from North Saanich. We just lives on the outskirts of Sydney, and we have found since we've moved there, it has been a challenge to get the family to downtown Sydney locations, to Grandma's house, which is on First Street, to the Sydney Star Sydney, or Star Cinema, other areas, because Rest Haven is really scary to be on a bike, especially with kids, and the bike path takes you sort of far away, so it feels like you're making a giant triangle, and then guess what, we end up picking the car. So I think that's an issue. Listening tonight has been really interesting because I think there's two different groups of opposition. There's the group that doesn't want sort of bike infrastructure, period, but then there's a really thoughtful group, I think, of pro-bikers that just want more and different alternatives. And my only comment is, I think the town went through an extensive consultation period. You had hundreds of comments that came in, good quality comments, with different alternatives and a consultant plan behind it. I think there's an element here of trusting the process. This is the corridor that came up as being possible, easy to do, and I think this is hopefully the first of many different infrastructures that can come in to make biking safer in Sydney. So I think there's an element of trusting the process and treating this not as just a yes, no, but a yes and to future infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Oliver. Seeing last chance for anybody? Seeing no one else, I'll close participation period. And we'll move on to next on the item, which is approval of the minutes. And this is from the regular committee of the whole meeting from December 9th, 2024. And there's a recommendation. Moved by Mayor McNeil-Smith for a second, seconded by Councillor Duncan. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. There are no presentations, and next on the item on the agenda is item 7A, development applications. And so for this particular one, there will be a presentation by the applicant, followed by a public participation period, as I mentioned previously. After that, we'll reach out to staff if they have anything they want to add, and at that point, committee will have the opportunity to ask questions of either the applicant or staff. So, Development Variance Permit Application number DV 100367 at 2042A Melville Drive to relax the requirements for accessory buildings in order to allow an accessory building in the front yard. And the presenter is present tonight, and Mr. Peter Buitendijk. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you for allowing me to come and present to you. My name is Peter Buitendijk, and I live at 2042 Melville Drive, which is a duplex. And so I have the house in the front, and then there's another house that's directly behind that has a backyard. So a little bit of history. I mean, my parents have been in this town since the early 1960s, maybe even before. I don't know. They're quite old now. I went to Sydney Elementary. I went to North Saanich. I graduated from Parkland Secondary School. I did all sorts of activities in this community. I recently moved back here because I love the area. I love Sydney. My mom still lives down here. I've been doing the best I can to support to make the community better. I'm working with Beacon Community Services, try to start a dad's group. I've been a social worker for many years, so I do a lot of work in that area too. With our home there, the cost of living is quite high. My kids, I have 3 children, adult children. One is married, and actually 2 days ago I had my first grandchild. And they had to move with us because they couldn't afford to live because it's so expensive. And we all really want to be able to grow. And both sides of me, the guy on going, is it towards north, I guess? He has a huge backyard, which I don't have. I only have a small front yard. And he grows a lot of stuff. And then on my other side, I have another person that grows a lot of stuff in their front yard, right? And so I just had grass, and I really wanted to grow my own vegetables and healthy vegetables, right? And so I have 8 people living in our home right now, trying to help them out, and mostly we're helping provide for most of the food for everybody. And my hope is to be able to grow some of my own food, just like the people around me. The greenhouse, I do have garden beds there, but I also have a greenhouse, and I really want to be able to grow. And it's not even a very, very big greenhouse. It's 8 by 10. And it's about 2 feet away from the fence. And it actually is probably the nicest greenhouse or building like in anybody's front yard in our whole community. I've taken pictures, and I can even show them to you of just even down the road. One of my friends has a greenhouse that's 6 inches from his fence, and no one said anything. Mine is actually I had someone come by, and they said they didn't even notice it was there because it blends right into my fence, right? And it actually is really nice. And I've got all the signatures from all my neighbors. They're all in support of it, and they're actually coming and ask me about it, right? And one guy that's right next to the greenhouse there comes out all the time during the summer when I was building it, and really excited, wanted to give me advice on what I can grow. And I'm hoping to have that greenhouse there, and I hope not to have to move it too, because for one, it'd be a lot of work, and it would take away my front yard, because I don't have a lot of room in my front yard. But I also wanted to make something, because I do have construction experience, wanted to make something that was looking nice and appealing, and something that actually would make our community look better, right? And being a good example to other people about, like, you can do this, you can grow yourself your own vegetables, right? And I've been learning and growing things in pots and everything like that. And my dad, who was a carpenter in this town for many years, had his own greenhouse, but he had a backyard, so he could grow it back there, right? And so my hope is, and I think you guys have all the pictures and everything like that, and you can see probably from that what my issue is that I just don't have a big front yard. Okay, so I wanted to have it as close to the fence as I possibly could, and make it look physically appealing, right? So that's my hope, and I'm really hoping that I don't have to tear it down. For one, I think there's nobody in my community around me that would have any problem with me doing that. And if you actually walk around and look at all the other violations that are just on our street, which I took pictures of just before coming here, that have really big eyesore buildings in their front yard, where mine actually looks nice. And even by walking in, you can see how everything is nice and straight. Everything looks really nice and level, and looks really, really good. And you know, I'm going to maintain it. And my kids, like my daughter-in-law, really wants to grow vegetables there too, like with everybody else, right? So I'm trying to set a good example, not just for my own family, but for our community. And this is kind of the way it goes, right? For people that have small yards that don't have the ability to actually grow, I mean, we have to learn how to maximize our space, right? To grow things, right? And this is kind of the way of the future. I mean, I don't know if everybody else is feeling the pinches at the grocery store about vegetables, and we're big vegetable eaters in our household. And we, like I say, we have 8 people, and we have a little baby, you know. And I this is how I learned growing up. My dad and my mom, okay, which the Councillor Garnett knows, right? They were very avid gardeners and had a greenhouse that. They even helped give food to the neighbors, right? And so I'm going to be helping my own large family that's living with me to have vegetables, and one's grown fresh and healthy, and that's what my passion is, right? So I'm just hoping that you would consider not having me move it and allowing me to finish it, and I can promise you it's going to be something that's going to look nice, right? Because if you look at the pictures, I don't think you'll feel that that's an eyesore in a community. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
And congratulations on your first grandchild.
thank you.
You're welcome. So at this point in time, we have public participation. Is there anybody in the public who would like to provide a comment or ask a question at this point in time? I'll call for a first time, for a second time, and for a third and final time. So I'll close that off, and I'll now move to staff and see if they have anything additional they'd like to add.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, this application is a development variance application, as was stated, to relax some zoning bylaw requirements that pertain to accessory buildings. The applicant is looking to, first of all, allow there to be an accessory building in the front yard, which the zoning bylaw doesn't allow, and also to reduce the required setback to the front and exterior side lot line from 1.2 meters to 0.7 meters. The reasons that the applicant gave in their presentation were also outlined in their letter of rationale that is attached to the staff report. In the report, staff give an overview of the building and show that it meets all other requirements for accessory buildings and has been designed to match and complement the existing house and fence that's there. So from a staff perspective, we have no concerns with the proposed variance. Be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Ms. Verhagen. So I'll now open it up to committee members, see if there's any questions of either the applicant or staff. Not unless you, apparently there's no questions to be asked. So we're good on that. And I would just like to add that I appreciate, you mentioned your letter rationale, and you mentioned it tonight as well. Thank you for reaching out to your neighbors. Whenever there's a variance request, it's really helpful when we can communicate with our neighbors who ones will be impacted by it. So I appreciate and commend you for doing that. Yeah, no, that's.
All over around. Even the other person that's behind us,
Yeah.
even supported it too.
Right. No, I appreciate that very much. And having visited it the other day, as you said, if I hadn't have known to go to that address, I wouldn't have even noticed it. So I mean, you've done a good job in that respect. So, you just want to move the recommendation, Councillor Novak?
I'll move the recommendation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Second.
I guess I didn't have to read it in.
Keep forgetting to read it into the record, by all means, please.
Would staff prefer us to read it in? No, we're fine. Okay. Would you like to motivate as the mover?
No, I think there's been enough information presented. The applicant doesn't have another backyard, and I think it's well within his right to be able to use his property in a way that's constructive and allows him to grow some vegetables. And from what I've seen of the photographs, I don't see that this should be a concern to the community. So I'm happy to move the recommendation so you go forward.
And the seconder?
Yeah, thank you. With this application, I guess there's just a couple
things I'll say is because our bylaw is usually complaints-based, and as Councillor Novak has already said, this is a front yard only situation. There's nowhere else he could build it. So I think it's important for members of the public to understand why exemptions are made for different people, in case there are people who are going to see his beautiful greenhouse, because as he said, a number of people will probably see it and get excited. Definitely that seems to happen every time people in this town build something. There's been a couple greenhouses on the south side as well, and just to make sure that we don't get a lot of applications where people are very interested in building something like this, to make sure that they check the bylaw first, and if at all they can comply because they have a backyard or enough room, to make sure that they do so. And I suspect that in this case, since normally staff don't necessarily go looking for infractions if they're not getting complaints from neighbors, and it looks like this, you know, that it blends in really well, that this would have been very much one of the things staff would do as a courtesy, to make sure that people are not expending a lot of energy building something that eventually would get turned down. And so this was probably something that staff would, again, make sure that people understand before you put a lot of effort into something and then have the very disappointing eventuality of council being able to turn it down. So thank you for coming forward tonight, and it looks good, and thanks for growing local food. Bye.
We'll finish comments and then we'll do a vote on it, and so you'll know within probably seconds. I'll reach to see if anybody else on committee would like to provide comment. Councillor Rintoul.
Perhaps as a point of order, I think because the recommendation wasn't read in, there may be some confusion in that sense, and the recommendation clarifies what happens next. So I don't know, perhaps as chair, if you want to read it in or have the mover read it in, then that would
Councillor Novak,
clarify
perhaps
the
you could read it
procedure.
in. That's kind of why I wanted to.
In retrospect, the recommendation is that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters or 246 feet of 2042 Melville Drive be notified regarding the development variance application number DV100367, bracket, to permit an accessory structure within the front yard of the property and to decrease the required front and interior side setbacks from 1.2 meters to 0.7 meters, close bracket, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variances.
It's been seconded. So seeing no other comments, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Councillor O'Keefe, you would like to speak?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the petitioner was looking for some clarity in terms of, I guess, when when this would come back. So this would, through you to staff, after the notice goes out, and then that information would come back to a future council, and at that point, council would officially approve the variance. Is that correct in terms of process?
That's correct, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah.
And so that process generally could take as little as 2 weeks, but could be more like 4 weeks, depending on timing of meetings.
Okay, yeah, just to clarify for that.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
I'm sorry if this was already mentioned, but this is what is referred to as a committee of the whole meeting. So we're meeting as a committee to make recommendations to council. So this will actually go to our council agenda next Monday night. The same motion will be read in and we'll take a vote. It's just part of a process, so it does take another week, and as our CEO, Mr. Edwards, indicated, it could take 3 or 4 weeks before we see any responses come back from the public for our final consideration.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We'll now move to item 8A. This is the communications and feedback, Bowerbank Road Neighbourhood Bikeway. And there's a staff report, and I'll ask staff for an introduction.
Good evening. For a number of years, developing an active transportation plan was one of Sydney's council's strategic priorities. In 2022, staff hired a consultant to engage the community and develop an active transportation plan based on this public feedback to encourage a shift towards multimodal transportation. One key aspect of this plan was to develop a north-south cycling corridor through the town. In July 2023, the active transportation plan was adopted by council, and direction to proceed with the Bowerbank Bicycle Boulevard was the top priority at the time. In October 2023, staff reported back to council with concept level design for the Bowerbank Bikeway. At that time, the design hadn't been totally ironed down, so there were a number of questions, and there's some discussion around public engagement at that time. Just to take a step back, there was some talk about it already with the public, but to achieve an all ages and abilities rating for bicycle infrastructure, there needs to be less than 1,000 vehicles per day on the road. City of Vancouver has actually lowered the standard for their cycling infrastructure to 500 vehicles per day on their shared streets. So the goal is really to reduce the volume of traffic to make cyclists feel comfortable sharing the road with cars. Bowerbank at this time has approximately 1,500 to 1,600 vehicles a day, so that's the amount the vehicle traffic needs to be reduced for it to be safe for cyclists, or feel more comfortable anyway for cyclists to use. The only way to really achieve this volume reduction is through traffic diversion. We do understand that many people still drive vehicles, and this plan does not in any way close Bowerbank to vehicle traffic in either direction. It does, however, would require people who are accessing Bowerbank to take different routes to certain areas, which in the worst case scenario would add about 1 kilometer to anyone's drive to get, if they're traveling southbound on Bowerbank, they would have to go down to Resthaven and back up on a residential street. Staff did submit a grant application for the Bowerbank Bikeway, which also includes the Calvin Lane paving, which I understand this conversation is not about. And a requirement of the grant does require that the cycling facility be all ages and ability according to the province's standards. So just keep that in mind as you proceed with the discussion, and I'll pass it over to Ms. Judson to go over some of the communications.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Because there have been questions and comments about communications, I'm just going to touch on that aspect of the staff report. Engagement on the Bowerbank Bikeway took place primarily in 2023, when it was one of the key initiatives in the draft active transportation plan. At that time, it was highlighted in the community survey, during the open house, and in the Town Talk newsletter, which is mailed to homes across the community. We also set up a booth outside of Sydney Elementary to talk to local families about the proposal, along with other parts of the active transportation plan, and we encourage community members to submit feedback on it. After that review period, when Council selected the Bikeway as a priority project for staff to advance, engagement with residents shifted from soliciting community feedback to information sharing. First, we needed to share that that decision had been made. We shared that the town would be moving ahead with creating Bowerbank Bikeway through a news release, a Town Talk newsletter, social media, and the Active Transportation Plan webpage. Since then, we've been striving to keep the project on the public's radar, putting out a news release and social media when the design of the Bikeway was reviewed by Council, and that included a link to the design. We also highlighted this project when we shared information about new bike repair kits that were placed at the library. In early December, we created a dedicated project website, which we promoted through social media and our site's homepage. We're also featuring this project on the cover of the upcoming issue of Town Talk, encouraging people to learn more about it online. Further communications, including on-site signage, letters to residents, and more in-depth social media, are planned to occur in the spring as we move closer to project implementation, unless Council would like us to take a different direction. In the staff report, there's a summary of feedback we've heard in recent months, along with a summary of communications to date. I hope it's helpful, and thank you for considering next steps. And I think Liam might or Mr. Edwards might be wrapping this up.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to make an additional comment that's not part of the recommendation that's in the report. And the recommendation that's in the report is for Council to give staff clear direction on how to proceed with the project. And after much discussion with staff and with others about the project, I did want to make a recommendation to Council to proceed with the project. And if council were to want to consider alternatives, at the very least, council to consider a pilot project whereby non-permanent infrastructure improvements could be made that could be removed after a year or so's time if a future decision was that the project wasn't deemed viable. The current project scope includes a very few permanent concrete structures that will alter traffic patterns. Really, it's just about 2 of these structures, and so this alternative recommendation could see a temporary structure being put in place that could be removed if it was deemed to no longer be a viable project. But just to wrap up again, my recommendation would be to carry forward with the project as it exists, or alternatively to at least pilot the project for a minimum of 1 year.
Thank you, Ms. Cleary, Ms. Judson, and Mr. Edwards. So I'll open it up to committee members if they have any questions of staff. Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you to staff, in the determination of traffic volumes on Bowerbank and the idea of reducing it from 1,600 or 1,700 per day down to 1,000 per day, is there any consideration given or any metric ascribed to peak periods and rush hour? For example, if the total volume of traffic is reduced from 1,700 to 1,000, what would be the impact on traffic flows at peak periods? Would they be reduced substantially as well?
Through to Councillor Novak. With respect to Bowerbank, focused on Bowerbank, we would still expect people who live in that neighborhood to use Bowerbank Road during those peak periods. So there would still be vehicles on the road. However, are you referring to areas outside of Bowerbank?
No, my understanding is that what makes the project viable is reduction of the total amount of traffic on Bowerbank in order for it to be an all ages and all abilities bike corridor. However, some of the arguments that we've been hearing talk about the fact that it's not a practical solution. It may meet the tenets of the rules and regs, but it may not be practical. So my question is, at peak periods when there's going to be a majority of users using it, let's, for argument's sake, let's call it the morning rush hour and the afternoon rush hours, are the volumes of traffic going to be substantially the same as they are now, or are they going to be substantially reduced as a result of the traffic diversion efforts?
Through to Councillor Novak, we expect the volumes to be significantly reduced. At the current time, like the traffic counts, we find about double the amount of vehicles are coming southbound versus northbound. So that to us, I mean, our traffic volumes, we don't look at like by hour movements, but we look at the daily movements, and daily it's about double the amount of vehicles coming southbound versus northbound. And we expect those vehicles are cutting through the neighborhood to access the highway, most likely during rush hours to get to and from work or to and from dropping their children off at school. So with the traffic diversions, we would expect those vehicles to travel on like Rest Haven Drive or take an alternate route. Perhaps some people living in North Saanich would then take Wayne Road instead of cutting through to use Bowerbank. So we would expect the volumes to be less during all times of the day.
But we're not really certain that that will be the case. I guess my point is that if we're going to do all this work and we're still going to have peak periods with substantially the same or similar traffic volumes that we have now, then why are we doing it? That's where we are.
Through to Councillor Novak, there are traffic diversions that prevent people from using the current cut-through patterns that they're using, like going from Bowerbank down to Siddle, which we understand is a popular route for people to access the highway. That will be there will be a concrete barrier in the way, so vehicles cannot turn right onto Siddle from Mills Road. So that would reduce that volume. Like people would have to take other routes. So it would definitely reduce traffic volumes during all periods of the day.
So instead of turning down Siddle, they could continue on, I don't remember what the road is, but they would just continue on to Rest Haven, correct?
Correct.
But that wouldn't reduce traffic volume on Bowerbank, is that correct?
So the plan includes 2 traffic diversions, one of them just between Piercy and Calvin. So anybody north of Piercy would not be able to go southbound on Bowerbank. And then there is a second traffic diversion for those traveling southbound at Siddle. So really it would just be people living south of Calvin and north of Siddle who would be on it. So the traffic volumes are much reduced. You don't have people in that whole North Saanich neighborhood cutting through the Bowerbank neighborhood, which is currently happening.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thanks. Just clarification.
Sorry, excuse me, Councillor O'Keefe. Mr. Edwards would like to comment.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to our engineer's response that the transportation consultant experts that have designed the project have designed it in such a way to try to maximize the traffic reductions on the area to meet those design guidelines of 1,000 vehicles or less, and at the same time trying to minimize the impact on the neighborhood. And so we're pretty confident that the design will achieve the desired outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. We're referring to Bowerbank as a cut-through. My understanding is it is currently identified as is it a collector route? Is that what it's called?
That's correct. It's identified as a collector in the town's OCP at this time.
And is that the same classification as Rest Haven? Or is Rest Haven a different kind of level up?
Rest Haven is an arterial. And
arterial.
In order for Bowerbank to become a bicycle boulevard, we would remove it from that collector designation and make it designated as a local road instead of a collector road.
Right, okay. So, yeah, I know it's been referred to as a cut-through, but I think it's important to know that it is a recognized collector road, and it is one of the primary, it is currently the primary connector going from that part of Sydney into downtown and the highway. My recollection is when we talked about this in May or June 2023, and I was looking through, I looked at the video of those meetings, and the consultant at the time, we were talking about what would be the impact of traffic diversion that was planned for Bowerbank, and did we have any info on how that would impact surrounding streets? At one point, she did say that additional traffic studies would be done during the design process, the design phase, in order to identify the impact of that traffic being diverted onto smaller neighborhood streets. My recollection is that ended up not happening because it was out of scope for the project. So I just want to confirm whether we did any traffic studies in terms of how diverting that traffic from Bowerbank onto other streets like Amelia and those other areas took place.
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, no, we didn't do an additional traffic study for the local neighborhood streets. We did talk to the consultant about this, and it is unlikely it's going to be like a 1-to-1 traffic ratio for the number of vehicles currently using Bowerbank to the number of vehicles that will be using Rest Haven, because people do use alternate routes. So it's very, you can make a best guess on where people will drive, but it's very challenging to actually accurately predict where people will change their routes or change their behaviors.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Edwards?
Again, sorry to chime in after every comment, but I did want to just make clear that the traffic pattern change that'll most likely happen in the southbound direction will be diverting traffic onto Ardwell. And so people that were otherwise historically or currently traveling south on Bowerbank to get to town or to get to the highway would be redirected along Ardwell towards Rest Haven. So Amelia won't be dramatically impacted in that way.
So
Councillor
just,
O'Keefe?
yeah, sort of seeking some clarity on that in terms of Amelia not being impacted. There's about at least, I'm just estimating, 200 or so people that live in those townhouses that are east or west of Bowerbank and Amelia. So my understanding is when they won't be able to travel south on Amelia. So if they want to go, south on Bowerbank. So if they come out of their townhouse complex near that Amelia roundabout, they won't be able to turn right to go into Sydney. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. They can turn right at the roundabout and continue south on Bowerbank. But what they cannot do is turn right onto Siddall. So
Right.
if you lived in that complex that you're speaking about, you could either travel along Amelia all the way to Rest Haven, or you could turn right onto Bowerbank and then travel to Amherst or Malaview or Bradford or carry on down to Mills.
Yeah, so I guess my point is that huge block of traffic, they won't be using Ardwell. They would be going either straight down Amelia, which would probably be the easiest route, or they would go down Bowerbank and then one of the other side streets, such as Malaview.
Sorry, what huge block of traffic are you talking about?
No, I'm thinking about there's about 150 townhouses.
Right.
That are.
But they won't all likely depart at the same time.
Oh, well, yeah, maybe not. No, but I'm just talking about in terms of where the additional traffic is going to go. They're part of the traffic currently, and we're looking to divert traffic off of Bowerbank. So all I'm saying is that that's a huge block of traffic, I think, from there. And so they will have, I'm just saying that it seems that there would be potential based on what's proposed to have additional traffic going down Amelia and some of those other neighborhood streets, which may not have sidewalks, or just wanting to confirm that that's kind of a possibility.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Questions from other members of committee? Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Chair. I just for a clarification from what Mr. Edwards just recently said. So if somebody's coming southbound on Bowerbank off of Ardwell, they will be able to continue as far as Siddall, but not, or as far as Mills, but not beyond? Did I just get the confirmation of that?
Councillor Duck, if you're traveling southbound on Bowerbank from Ardwell, you will not be able to continue past Piercy. You'll have to turn right onto Piercy Road because you won't be able to go further south than that.
Thank you. That's what I thought, because that's what the diagram shows. The concerns that have been expressed to me, and maybe staff can clarify this, is really what we're trying to do, and Ms. Clary identified that most of the density of traffic is southbound on Bowerbank. Has there been any consideration to close Bowerbank at Mills? So it essentially becomes a dead end there. So there can't be any southbound or northbound traffic on Bowerbank from that point. Because the residents I've spoken to, their biggest concern is that they use the exit at McDonald Park South to get off the highway and come into their neighborhood to avoid the congestion in downtown Sydney. And they're not looking at trying to get back on the highway. They'll do that by going down to Rest Haven and out to the highway through Sydney. But when coming home, they like to be able to get off the highway and come directly into their neighborhood. And so I'm just wondering if there's been any consideration to close Bowerbank at Mills Road to north and southbound traffic. Thank you.
Through to Councillor Duck, we did ask the consultant how they would anticipate the project would function if just the traffic diversion at Siddle was implemented, which is kind of what you're referring to. It wouldn't close Bowerbank at Mills, but it wouldn't allow the rest of the traffic to cut through using Siddle and 7th to the highway. And they didn't think that would be sufficient to get down to the 1,000 vehicles per day that's required. However, as mentioned before, it is really hard to say how people will change their traffic patterns or traffic movements, and if there's a change put into place. So it's challenging to say for sure. However, the consultant, based on their many years of experience and their knowledge of Sydney and the traffic data we've provided to them, they didn't think that would be sufficient.
Councillor Duck, the floor is still yours.
I guess I'm surprised because the problem is the traffic coming down Bowerbank onto Mills and onto Siddle is why we're closing off Siddle in the northbound direction and somewhat subsequently Bowerbank in the southbound. But if we actually close Bowerbank at Mills, we're going to alleviate that problem in both directions. And so the residents in that area are concerned because of their access to their neighborhood, having to go down, for example, all the way down Ardwell, come across to whether that's Calvin or Amelia or Amherst or Mills, all the way to get into that. It's just the congestion they're going to face getting into the home. And I recognize that that's not a long distance, but why are we, if we're looking at limiting traffic on Bowerbank, why are we looking at limiting the traffic to the neighborhood? I think by closing Bowerbank to traffic beyond Mills might be a way of solving this problem. As Mr. Edwards suggested, this may be a way which we could test it by closing off Bowerbank with those concrete abutments and seeing how that changes the traffic patterns. Thank you.
Ms. Clary?
I do want to clarify to Councillor Duck as well that Mills Road is the bus route, so buses would still have to be able to get through Bowerbank, so we couldn't permanently close it. We would have to allow buses to travel through there still.
Okay, so to be clear, just to clarify, buses will be on Bowerbank all the way through to Mills, just cars won't.
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Just before, because you've spoken once, any first time want to ask questions of staff at this point? Okay, Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you to staff, was there any consideration given to the volume of traffic likely to occur on Mills Road as a result of the diversion at Siddle? All the southbound traffic from Bowerbank is going to end up on Mills Road on the way to Resthaven in order to be able to get into town or to get back to the highway. And Mills Road is already, it's fairly congested because of the parking on the street due to staff from the care homes. They park both sides of the street. It's extremely congested there. And I'm just wondering if the additional traffic volume on Mills Road is going to create a bigger problem than was anticipated.
Through to Councillor Novak, we haven't looked at that exact situation. However, we would expect people living in the Bowerbank neighborhood to take whatever local road is closest to them to access Resthaven. We wouldn't expect people to be driving down Bowerbank to Mills. However, that may happen, and if that does happen, we would have to implement a solution. In September of 2024, the buses were rerouted to, instead of using Henry, they are now using Mills, and we haven't heard any complaints from that change. So buses are able to safely navigate Mills and turn onto Resthaven from there.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Actually, just have a follow-up since Ms. Clary brought up that bus. I remember when we were having these discussions, maybe Councillor O'Keefe can remember how long those meetings were. I remember 5 hours for the last one. But the last thing that I had seen when I came in and we were talking about moving that bus was that suddenly there was a bunch of middle school kids at it. And I worried that they were going to have to be going somewhere else. And we talked about BC Transit usually had ridership numbers to schools, and I'm just wondering if they have data, if their data sharing, event has come up to you about where the middle school kids are now, and how, if we have quite a few in that neighborhood that are still having to go to the new bus stops.
Through to Councillor Duncan, we don't have the data for that exact stop. However, we did talk to BC Transit about their requirements for distance to bus stop, and the stop on Mills is within that required distance. So there are bus stops on Resthaven, which are very close to the one that was on Henry. So we did work through that, but I don't have numbers of the ridership at this time.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no other, I just have one question, if I may, through myself to staff. There was identified the Ardwell Resthaven, having to turn right on Resthaven down Ardwell. That will become a bit more, I want to use the word congested, but there will be more traffic through there with the diversion. So having familiarity with that, having driven that route for a couple of years and having to make that right turn, appreciating that staff have said that there's been quite a bit of foliage cut back, and it has. Like, I drove it the other day, and it's much more, you have much more visible sight lines. But this, I'm just wondering about if there's something from an engineering point of view that we can do in terms of the speed, because people have mentioned the fact you're trying to edge out and be careful, and then you're at a slow speed when you turn, and the traffic does go 50, 60, 70, so they're on you fast. And so I'm wondering, do we have within our purview to potentially install a 30-kilometer-an-hour zone similar to Shoal Center in that area, to maybe have the traffic slow down?
Through to Councillor Garnett, it's not in right now our streets and traffic bylaw is very specific about where 30 kilometers is in Sydney, and it starts in front of the Shoal Center on Resthaven. So even though I guess we could go install a sign, it wouldn't necessarily be enforceable unless we updated our bylaw. The medians at Ardwell and Resthaven are intended to be traffic calming. They're intended to slow people down. And if it is an issue, like, we can look at additional traffic calming in the area. I do think Resthaven Drive is likely our next corridor that we review from a traffic safety standpoint. But yes, at this time, we don't have any plans. Like, it's not part of this project scope to include additional traffic calming on Resthaven.
Oh, I appreciate that. I realize it wasn't part of the scope, but just as an unintended consequence. Great, thank you very much. Councillor Rinto?
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up to that question, if I may, through you to staff. Staff, could you just comment, I know I certainly have, and others on council advocated for speed reductions throughout Sydney. This is identified in the strategic plan. Staff were to bring a report forward to council, is it not in this quarter or next quarter with respect to speed reduction throughout the town, which could include this particular location that Councillor Garnett was speaking to?
Through to Councillor Rintoul, we were directed to bring a report back on local streets, which Resthaven is not a local road. It's a arterial road, so Resthaven would not be within the scope of that report. And it is drafted. It's no longer part of the strategic priorities, just for clarification, but it is something that's on the list of things to bring back.
And then if I may, further to that, you made reference to the bylaw change that would be required to address that. That could very well then be an outcome of that report coming to staff, that we look to address this particular location, the town as a whole, to include other than just the local roads that you referenced.
That is correct, but again, just to clarify, the report that we're bringing back is specifically to local roads, not to collect or arterial. And then if Bowerbank Bicycle Bikeway is to proceed, that would be treated as a separate
Thank
issue.
you. I'll just take the opportunity, Chair, to continue to suggest to Council, recognize our committee, but that speed reduction is one of the, I think, most comprehensive manners to address safety, not just for pedestrians, cyclists, but for other motorists as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on the, if Bowerbank remains open to bus traffic, both north and southbound, what will limit cars from using that surface? Because within the Bowerbank, that you can't turn off of Mills, and you can't turn off of beyond Piercy, what will limit cars from going down those roads coming from those directions?
Through to Councillor Duck, there is a a diversion that is a visual diversion saying buses only. The pavement will change slightly in that location. There will be a center median to prevent vehicles from driving through there. And then there's also plans to be a raised crosswalk just after that on Kelvin Avenue. So, you know, a vehicle who's really wants to get through would be able to drive through. However, that's not the intent. The intent is to divert traffic and just that location be just for buses or emergency services.
Thank you, understood. But there will be no limitations to vehicles, so this will become an enforcement challenge for the RCMP both at Mills and Bowerbank and Percy and Bowerbank, correct?
Through to Councillor Duck, the diversion at Siddle is more concrete. Like it is a traffic island that would not allow vehicles to easily get around it. So that diversion's a bit different because that is partly why we move the buses off of Henry and move them to Mills so that buses don't have to go down Siddle anymore. So that traffic diversion is much more challenging for a vehicle to get by. Obviously, dangerous driving is a potential, and we'd have to deal with that if it came. And we would not expect the RCMP to have the resources to enforce this sort of thing. So we would deal with it if it became a significant issue. Maybe we could get our bylaw officer out there occasionally. But the RCMP have many other pressing issues to deal with.
Thank you. It wasn't necessarily at Mills and Siddle. It was at Mills and Bowerbank that I was concerned about because that's where the bus will go. So yeah, and I don't know, does our bylaw officer have the ability to invoke traffic infractions?
I would have to get back to you on that, but he would be able to perform education, and we could. I know the RCMP has connections with a community group who does educational speed enforcement, so we could reach out to them to see if they would look at educational enforcement for the bus diversion. However, at Mills and Bowerbank, there is no traffic diversion. It's just at Mills and Siddle.
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. So looking to committee for a recommendation of some sort. Councillor Novak.
I'm prepared to make a recommendation that staff proceed with the Bowerbank Road Neighbourhood Bikeway project and communications as planned.
Second.
Have it moved by Councillor Novak and seconded by Councillor Duncan. Look to Councillor Novak to motivate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard a lot about this project from many people. I truly respect and appreciate the citizenry that have come out to express their opinions and concerns. However, I think the evidence is quite compelling that there has been a substantial public engagement period going back a number of years on this project, and there's been lots of time for feedback to come in to ultimately inform the final decision and the final planning for this. I think the plan is reasonable. I think the idea that moving the bike lane to another north-south corridor, such as second or third, is not necessarily going to be an improvement. It is likely that there would be similar types of objection from some of the local citizenry. The bottom line is that the people who use their bikes the most are the ones that are seemingly in favor of the project as it stands. People that don't use their bikes and are concerned about traffic delays, their concerns are valid. However, I think in consideration of the safety of cyclists and the people on Bowerbank, a 60-second detour is not sufficient for me to think that we should avoid this project at all. I think we should proceed. Ms. Clary has stated that we could potentially review this after a year and see whether or not we're achieving the goals that were originally set out for it. And if so, great, but if not, we could consider revisions to the program. I think it's reasonable to do that, and so I'm happy to make this recommendation. I don't really see any alternative if we are going to be a town that has an active transportation plan, and we are going to favor active transportation over the long haul. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan?
I have nothing to add, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I'm not in support of this moving forward at this time for a number of reasons. One of the things we've heard is that there's been a lot of engagement, ample engagement. People had a chance already to weigh in on this. And so over the past week, I went and I reviewed all of that feedback, or I reviewed the Facebook posts, the town talks, the information that was communicated through press releases in the PNR. And I looked at the videos of our meetings. And the thing that stood out to me when I looked at all that is in looking at the communications that we put out to people in May, June, October 23, where this was high on our agenda and in our minds, is that we didn't have any really specific information about exactly what that corridor was going to look like. And when I looked at what we provided on Facebook and town talks and press releases, the gist of what we told people was that we were developing a bike boulevard on Bowerbank. It would have minimal impact on street parking, and the aim would be to reduce traffic speeds and volumes along the roadway with tools that could include traffic diversion, lower speed limits, and crosswalk beacons. In the report that we looked at in June and in October of that year, it was mentioned that there would be further work done to finalize its design. However, I recall we asked about further engagement with residents because up to that point, there hadn't been anything go out specifically to residents along Bowerbank or in that neighborhood. And what the recommendation was at the time is that no further engagement was recommended with residents because it was felt there had already been enough during the active transportation engagement process. In retrospect, I think maybe we should have pressed to have more direct communication and opportunities once we had a concrete plan where residents could weigh in. And you can argue that, well, if they had gone and looked at all the staff reports and then looked at the active transportation plan that was, can't remember, was it 200 pages or 150 pages? And there was stuff in there on the Bowerbank corridor. But the only time that we provided any real clarity on, okay, folks, this is what's going to happen, was this past December. And I think it's notable that once we did signal to people that here is something that's going to happen in your neighborhood, here's how it's going to work, here's where the traffic diversions are going to be. That's when we started to hear the volumes of feedback, and people have come forward with concerns about that. And I think there's a lot of good information that's come from that. Some of the things that have been brought up, and these are things that we didn't discuss before because we didn't exactly know what it was going to look like. And I recall when we discussed it ourselves, and even still tonight, struggling with how is this going to work and how's the traffic flow. So when I look at all the feedback, what we heard in the letters, what we heard tonight, this is not a situation of there's the car people and the bike people. I'm hearing a lot from people who are cyclists, but they don't think that this is the best route. And I tend to agree with them for a number of reasons. When I look at this, I look at what were the goals or the outcomes that we were wanting to achieve in the active transportation plan. And one of those was improved quality of life, safety, health, and well-being. And those are all good things. And in terms of this project, I think it may make Bowerbank a quieter and safer for some, but that won't necessarily be the case on the neighboring streets. So as we've noted, there were no traffic studies or impact studies to determine what the impact would be on those smaller streets, and that's a concern to me. We heard someone today, an older person, talk about how they use those side streets because they're less busy and it's easier to get around. One of the ladies on our accessibility committee is blind, and she's mentioned to me her and her blind friends often use those side streets because they feel safer. There was a letter that we received about concern about Melissa Street and that trail through Melissa Park that a lot of kids use to get to and from school. And then, of course, there will be additional traffic on those streets, Amelia. And so my concern is that in our aim to improve safety on Bowerbank, we are pushing that problem onto neighboring streets that aren't equipped to deal with that. So that's one thing for me. The other outcome that we were looking for with active transportation was reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And it seems to me that this plan could actually increase greenhouse gas emissions because now people are going to have to take more circuitous routes to get to their home. So those 200 or so people living in those townhouses, it's an extra kilometer for them. And I don't know how that will impact others as well, but we're not, it doesn't seem to me that we would be reducing greenhouse gas emissions. One might argue that, well, we could be if we have Bowerbank as a bike boulevard, maybe people will bike more, and maybe that's the case. But I don't feel that that would counteract the additional cars having to do loop-de-loops through the neighborhood. Also, just in terms of traffic congestion on Rest Haven. And so Bowerbank, like I was saying earlier, is the only other north-south road in that part of Sydney to help people get from North Sydney into downtown Sydney and then out to the highway. And I worry about that additional congestion that's going to end up on Rest Haven and Beacon, which is already a difficult spot. I also worry, we had some letters express concern about parents driving their kids to school. Bowerbank is a popular route for that. So now they're going to have to go along Rest Haven and then take a turn into Henry. And so I have concerns about that additional congestion there with kids being dropped off and safety issues as well. And I think, so for those reasons, I think, and I think the other thing to note is, just going back in time a bit, is that when this particular bike corridor was proposed, I think it's important to note that it wasn't the highest thing. It ended up coming up higher on the cycling priorities because we decided to demote 5th Street and Bevan to a lower priority. And so this kind of bubbled up to the top. But my recollection is from the survey results, there was only 19% of people that were in favor of the corridor at the time. So I think what we're trying to do is a good thing in terms of active transportation and getting people to cycle. However, what I'm worried with this is that we're not going to achieve what we want. We're pushing one set of traffic problems into other parts of the neighborhood without having done any consultation with those individuals and without having any traffic studies to support what we're doing. And, you know, we can say that, well, we'll see how it goes and maybe we'll work it out later. I think people expect us to be a bit more proactive and be doing that homework up front. I'll leave it at that, thanks.
Okay, Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Chair. I support this recommendation moving forward. It is the first of our north-south active transportation plans for cycling. So I think, as it was mentioned by in public presentation, it doesn't matter where we do this, we're going to see a similar challenge because it does change our access to different things. So change is the biggest problem here. I say that I support this recommendation, but I say that with caution because what people have to understand is vehicular traffic on Bowerbank between Calvin and Mills will continue, as will bus traffic. So there's not any limitation there. There will just be access to Bowerbank from Ardwell at Piercy and from Mills at Siddle. But cars will still be able to get onto this road. So I think for the neighborhood, it'll still work well, but it'll take some education as to relatively how do we start to limit traffic here, because there will only be visible indicators that this is not for vehicular traffic to enter, but they'll still be able to do that. So it will be an enforcement issue, I'm sure. But it is, again, our first step in a north-south active transportation plan for cycling. So I do support it moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, I'm inclined to support the motion that's before us. Yeah, there's no silver bullet. This isn't it, but this is part of, as Councillor Duck noted, perhaps a first step towards making some ATP improvements for the town of Sydney. Certainly, speed reduction throughout the community is an important one as well, in my mind. With regard to Bowerbank and Stiddle, I think if there's been one continuity with regards to concern for traffic in this community in the 6 years I've been on council, it is often references to Bowerbank and Stiddle. And so Councillor Keith's correct. This percolated and came up to the top of our list. It wasn't the first intent, certainly, but I feel like, at least for myself, in terms of addressing cyclist safety, encouraging traffic off of Bowerbank and Siddle, that this made sense because I saw the destination through the lens of Sydney Elementary for children cycling or moving to school through active means, and I think this was a step, in my mind at least, in helping to secure that transit route for cyclists further and adding to traffic calming initiatives for both Bowerbank and Siddle. So I'll leave my comments there, Chair.
Mayor McGill-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll begin with a question through to staff, and that is, if council were to consider an amendment to the motion on the floor with regards to this becoming a pilot project with non-permanent infrastructure, would staff have a recommendation of whether it was 1 year or 2 year? Would 1 year be sufficient for generating information, or?
I would always seek for more time for a pilot to get more data, better data. Additionally, council needs to be aware that if it were to become a pilot project and with temporary elements, that it would likely no longer be eligible for grant funding. And so we would lose that opportunity of reducing the cost impact.
Thank you. I would like to propose an amendment that this, to the motion on the floor, that it, with the addition that it become a 2-year pilot.
Second for discussion.
Thank you. So I'd like to, sorry, I'm actually going.
Sorry, should I have a vote on whether we're gonna?
Sorry?
Have no?
It's been seconded, so you can discuss it.
But it's an amendment, we should probably vote on. No, never mind, go ahead, motivate.
Sorry, I wanted to motivate on the entire motion, and properly speaking, I should only be motivating on the amendment. But I think my overall comments with regards to this, what is being proposed as a pilot is relevant to the amendment. So This represents significant change for the community, and I want to also speak to engagement. I too watched the council meeting that we had in October of 2023, where staff brought forward a report that had pretty close to the diversions that we're looking at now. There was a diversion at Siddle, and there was a diversion. It was suggested that the diversion would be at Ardwell, not at Percy, but it was indicated that by staff that there would be final design to be done. So we did understand that there would be some diversion there as a mechanism, as a tool to meet the provincial all accessible standard to get below 1,000 users per day. And we did have questions at that time for staff with regards to what the potential impacts of traffic diversion would be. I didn't watch the beginning of the meeting, but I don't recall significant members of the public attending that meeting and giving us the views that we've had in writing and in person over 2 meetings now. And I think, as Councillor O'Keefe indicated, and as I made reference at our meeting last week, I believe the communications that we did in early December, where the actual design where the map showing the specific diversion at Percy and the specific diversions at Siddle were made public on a map, was what initiated fairly substantial response from the public. And there have been views on both sides, but I'll come back to that. So when we discussed it in October of 23, we asked about engagement at that time. And we had already had a fair bit of engagement. We had had a lot of feedback to the plan to date at that time. And we made changes to the active transportation plan. I'm repeating myself a little bit for last week, but we made changes with regards to withdrawing the route, the Mills cycling corridor, to removing the second sidewalk or amending it significantly on Ardwell, and to reprioritizing, that is, taking out the first 2 priorities, leaving them in the plan, but no longer having the 2 downtown cycling corridors as the first and second priority. So we did do excellent engagement, and we did have a lot of feedback, and we did make changes. However, we didn't get a lot of feedback on the Bowerbank specifically, and we saw that once the specific traffic diversions were communicated in December, that we've received much more feedback. Again, both those in favor and those opposed. What we are doing in terms of wanting to create a cycling bikeway is what cities around the world, what cities around North America, what cities regionally are doing, other municipalities within the region. And we know, if we follow the media, whether it be print, social media, or TV or radio, that there has been controversy with protected bicycling lanes, with other cycling infrastructure in those communities. But communities, and this was Council's rationale of the day, was that an active transportation plan was important for our community to try to facilitate mode shift, to try to make it safer for pedestrians and for cyclists and for road users themselves. Councillor Rintoul mentioned the important initiative that accompanies this in terms of reducing speed limits on local roads throughout the community, which we're not complete doing. Haven't finished doing that yet, but we're moving in that direction. So we can appreciate with the response that we've had from the neighborhood, from the community, that there are concerns with this. There's been some suggestion, both in writing and both speakers last week and this week, that we should take a step back and we should consider tweaking this. We should consider making some changes. we have gone to great lengths, to great effort with the consultant, with engagement, with comments, to come up, and we do believe, both from the consultant side, from the staff side, and from council side, that we believe this is the best design. We can go back and propose other options, but this was seen to be the best design. So the concerns that are noted, the staff have summarized some of them, and I think they've captured virtually all of them. But one of them is that, why are we doing this? There's 2 existing parallel cycling routes. There is the CRD Lochside Trail, and for members of the public who weren't aware, the Capital Regional District, and I'm council's representative to the Regional District Board or organization, has a lease with Provincial Highways for the Lochside path that goes from Ardwell all the way to Weiler along the highway. And that cycling path is not in town of Sydney property; it's actually on provincial highway right away. And CRD has actually spent in the neighborhood of $500,000 or $600,000 improving the base and repaving it from Ardwell to Beacon, and they're now working on a section from Beacon to Weiler. That will actually be more expensive, or as expensive as the first 2 pieces that were done. So it's investment in excess of $1 million by the Capital Region, and we all pay CRD taxes, and that's one of the places they go. One of the questions I asked as a participant at CRD, and actually chair of the Regional Parks and Regional Trails Committee for the past 2 years, 2023 and 2024, whether it wasn't possible that we actually widen those trails, given that they are well used throughout the 100 kilometers in the Capital Region and even on Lochside Drive. The Capital Regional District Board approved some 2 years ago, and it's underway now, a $50 million project to widen and separate between pedestrian and cycling 6 kilometers of the Lochside Trail and the Galloping Goose Trail at its busiest location in downtown Victoria, and just coming up Lochside Trail into Saanich and just going out Galloping Goose to the west. Deemed as the highest priority after works with consultants. So while a significant sum is being spent there, and that's a 3-year project, and there will be other improvements after that, it was felt that the improvements of improving the base of the current trail in Sydney and paving it would be an improvement. I think it's an improvement. Would we have additional use? Would it encourage more people to walk and cycle and roll if that trail was wide? Yes, but it would cost many millions of dollars to do that, and it hasn't been made a priority. West Shore, further Galloping Goose portion would love improvements as well. So I just wanted to. I'm coming back to the point with regards to the concern or the question that some members of the public have asked, the neighborhood have asked. There's already 2 parallel trails. One is the Lochside Trail. The other is Resthaven. Quite frankly, Resthaven, which I travel multiple times a day, is, although at least to Calvin, is from the downtown, I don't know if it's busier or not than Lochside in terms of cycling, but there are a lot of cyclists on Resthaven. However, you don't see a lot of children cycling on Resthaven. It's the fastest speed and the largest volume of traffic, and I have to say, even myself and raising our daughter found it safety, particularly with cars parked on both sides of the street, a challenge on Resthaven. So the answer to the question is why Bowerbank, when you have those 2 cycling corridors, is that the Lochside Trail is a multi-use path. You have walkers. I have tried to go for a run on the trail at the time of day where students are walking north to North Saanich Middle School and students are walking south to go to Sydney Elementary, and they'll walk in a clump of 5 that takes up the entire width of the trail. And so it makes it difficult for cyclists and others using the trail just because of how busy it is. Bowerbank is used today as a cycling corridor for students going to children going to Sydney Elementary, and it's Bowerbank all the way from Resthaven and then taking Melville from McDonald Park Road through to Bowerbank is an important connection from the north part of our community south towards the school and towards the downtown. And so our council prioritized that because there was schools at either end to do that. And if we're going to move forward as a community, last council, this council has felt that an active transportation plan is important, that we want to increase safety for pedestrians and cyclists and road users, and we need to make efforts to provide those increased safety and opportunity. And so I'm supportive of a pilot project. We will learn from it. And there is a possibility that some of the outcomes that we couldn't forecast, we could do additional studies now. We could have a consultant do additional studies. We don't know exactly how people will change their behaviors when these traffic diversions are in place. However, the consultants who have consulted with other municipalities and have put in neighborhood traffic diversions to lower the traffic volumes on residential streets so that they can be considered all ages accessible, feel this is a good recommendation, and I'm willing to implement this pilot to try and bring an improvement to our community. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave my comments there.
I'll move to the seconder, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I seconded it for discussion, and I think my lingering concern with the prospect of bringing this forward as a pilot project is putting that provincial grant at risk. And I note in the staff report that staff anticipate hearing back from the province as early as February next month, at the latest March. So during first quarter, that is a grant that would accommodate 70% of the cost of this project as it's anticipated, and to me, putting that at risk is a concern, and what I think is going to be a tight budget year for a number of competing considerations, and I'm not convinced that any of our ATP initiatives that we implement over the course of time, cannot be tweaked and accommodated better as we learn from implementation. So I'm inclined to vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in favor of the amendment simply because I don't think it's necessary. I think we heard from staff that if we do follow the program and implement the project as originally planned, we can still review it after a year, after 2 years, make adjustment, tweaks. And I don't think it's necessary, as my colleague just mentioned, to put a grant at risk simply by changing this from a project to a pilot project. I'm not sure it achieves anything tangible for the community. The project as it's described will be implemented and it will be studied, and if we find that there are areas that need to be tweaked, we can still tweak them without changing it from a project to a pilot project. So for those reasons alone, I'm not in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thanks. I'm not in favor of the boulevard either way. You already know that. But in terms of the particular amendment, I would not be in favor of it just because it's not clear, like, what would we be looking at the end of the pilot? And so, and I have those same concerns even, you know, it sounds like it's gonna go through, but at the end of 1 year or 2 years, what is it that we're gonna look at to see if this works or not? Is it just the data that shows, look, yay, we increase traffic volume by a certain percent, and that's a good thing. But what are the other things we're gonna look at? Are we gonna look at whether there was increased pedestrian accidents or motor vehicle accidents on surrounding streets? Did we get complaints from other neighborhoods now about speeding cars? We've heard from Siddle for a number of years. I suspect that those complaints will decline if this goes forward, but now we might get them on Amelia and Melissa and Malview. So I think it's important that whatever we do going forward, whether it's a pilot or the project as a whole, that we pay attention to the outcomes, not just specifically the data. So the outcomes that we identified were safety, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So those, to me, are the things we should be measuring, not that we managed to decrease the number of cars on the street by a certain amount. Thanks.
I'll look to Councillor Duncan or Councillor Duck as first-time speakers. Would you like to speak to the amendment? Nope. Okay. Any second-time speakers? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? Councillor Novak, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, myself, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor Duck all opposed. Motion fails. So we're back to the main motion on the floor. Anybody with any further comments they'd like to add? Okay, seeing none, I will just briefly as I can, weigh in. I when I was going through this weekend, I couldn't help but think of Field of Dreams. Build it and they will, if you build it, they will come. And I don't know if that'll happen if we put this cycling boulevard in here in place, the bikeway, and if people will use it more, but we don't know they won't. I think back to the Breathitt Park playground, and I had a person approach me asking why we're putting a playground at Breathitt Park because they never see children play there. And I said, this is probably because there's not a playground. And we put the playground in, and I can tell you from first-hand experience, there are children at that playground almost every day of the week at all times of the day. So that's one thought that popped into my mind. I do want to address something that's been sort of floating around. I'm not a social media person, but there was some sort of information was given to us that we don't know the area. We haven't done a site visit. I can attest four members of council live in close proximity to this, so I'm sure they're well acquainted with the area. I myself was the delivery person for Canada Post for many, many years, as far back as 1993, when it was a fish packing plant, and after that, the hole in the ground, or the Sydney Pool, we called it in the day. And I can attest to the traffic volumes and the speed. And I hearken back and think to myself, when these streets were first designed, and I wasn't around when they were, I can envision the engineers thought this would be the end result of what they put in place in these neighborhoods. The traffic circle at Amelia was put in as a traffic calming measure in response to concerns from the neighborhood. And I had many conversations with my customers over the years about those very issues. Siddall, as has been referred, has been a constant problem as far as speed. I look at this overall perspective, and I don't hone in on the bike aspect of it. I hone in on the whole transportation aspect of it. And the fact that anytime you can reduce traffic volumes, you increase the likelihood of increased safety. And there's a real focus on Amelia Avenue for some reason. I don't know why. I think the traffic will be dispersed amongst the 5 and the 6th Street if you count Mills Road. So it won't be as bad as people think it is. I did a test drive. I went out there last Thursday afternoon and did the drive from Ardwell Bowerbank to Twin Oaks, which is about halfway. It's on the little western portion of Amelia. It's about halfway. And then I did the drive around down Ardwell, turned right, and up Amelia to the same spot. It was a difference of 1 minute and 16 seconds. So the previous speaker spoke to about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. That will be the difference amount of time. And do I consider the inconvenience of 2 minutes more important than safety for residents? No, I don't. I just, having delivered there for so long and having traveled every inch of that street, because I did Bowerbank from Piercy to Mills, I have a unique perspective on how the traffic patterns flow through there, the safety issues, all of that, because I had to cross that street so many times. And I did see the issues that people have brought up in terms of safety. I do appreciate this is a change, and I can speak to that because I'm a person, as my wife would contest, I hate change. I absolutely detest it. But at the same time, when I listen and have that change happen, eventually it becomes a routine, and it's the next thing I'm going to have to change. It's difficult. This is the first one. And I think it takes political will on our part, because there's going to be pushback. But at the same time, we're going to get pushback on everything. Do we consider the active transportation plan to be important? Is it important enough to move forward on this initiative? And my answer to that question is yes. And for the reasons I've stated. So I will support the recommendation. And I do appreciate all the feedback from everybody we've gotten. It's important to have that information in terms of the whole context of what's being provided here. And I do think it's important if we go forward, and I'm not going to speak to the amendment, but the granting is really important, because that's a huge amount of money that we will save. That, as I've said at a previous meeting when this came forth in October, we then can help get other priorities in terms of sidewalks and crosswalks in our community can be done faster based on staff resources, but we'll then have the possibility to have the money there that we might not have, which may have pushed it further down the line. So I think as it overall will benefit our community in other ways as well, as not just this neighborhood. And I'll leave my thoughts there. And Councillor O'Keefe, if you'd like to speak again.
Sure. Just one parting observation through this process is one thing that comes to my mind is lesson learned for me from this process is that people will get engaged when they know that there's something specific that's going to impact them, and they realize how it's going to impact them specifically. We had a lesson, I think, at the end of last year when council decided to move forward. We're talking about making changes on All Bay Road and what we were going to do on the boulevards there. And the comment that was made in the staff report is we don't think we need to do any further engagement with this because we've already had lots of discussion on it. And guess what happened? We got all kinds of input on that because people want to be involved and engaged in what's going on on their street. I think personally that if we had put the information out that we put out in December, back in October, we would have heard this feedback. People weren't sitting around not wanting to get involved. People in Sydney do want to get involved. They just depend on us to say, to let them know that that is available. A good example of when we've done something good, and it was actually brought up in one of the letters here, on my street on Piercy Avenue, the town was talking about putting up sidewalks. And they sent a letter to every person on our street to say, hey, we're thinking of doing this. Do you think you want sidewalks? And if so, do you want them on this side or that side? And so every person on the street had an opportunity to voice their opinion. And to me, that's a good news story and a good way to proceed. So as we, do these great big huge things like active transportation plans or other plans, I think it's worthwhile to keep in mind that people want to know what's going on and they want to be engaged. Thanks.
I'll look for a final time if anybody would like to provide a comment. Seeing none, move the motion. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. Councillor O'Keefe. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody, for the debate and discussion. We have no other business to attend to, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Rintoul, seconded by Councillor Novak. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you.